really believe in this cyclical living when you have a cycle, but even when you don't have a cycle, we're still like cyclical beings and we feel different at different weeks and different days and different times. So for me, I like to use it as a reminder of listening to our body and paying attention and also just honoring what's coming up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Myers Detox podcast. My name is Dr. Wendy Myers, and you can find my work at myersdetox.com. In this show, we talk about everything related to heavy metal detoxification, health issues caused by toxins, bioenergetics, and anti-aging. Or bioenergetics is basically energy medicine, which is one of my passions. And so on this show today, we have Bria Gadd on the show, and she's the period whisperer. We're going to be talking everything hormones and what happens in that 10 years before you go into menopause, the importance of hormone testing and keeping an eye on your hormones, what kind of hormone replacement you can do during this time to analyze how you feel. We talk about progesterone and estrogen and testosterone and bioidentical in different forms of hormone testing and hormone supplementation and replacement. Just lots of really, really interesting tips on the show. She's a great interview. She's super energetic and knowledgeable. And she also is going to talk about all the different symptoms you might be experiencing during this time, during this transition. Some of them a little bit scary, but we give you a lot of solutions and insight into what you can do, to optimize how you feel during your perimenopause years. And our guest, Bria Gadd, she's an integrative nutritionist, holistic health coach, and certified personal trainer who specializes in female hormones, helping women with weight release and energy gain in pre and post menopause and finding clarity in hormonal chaos. So you can learn about Bria's work at briatheperiodwhisperer.com. So Bria, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm really excited to be here. I love your podcast and how you serve.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I'm really happy you're coming on because I love this topic, talking about perimenopause. A lot of people talk about menopause, but I think it's very, very important because I've had a lot of like girlfriends of mine that ask me questions. They're like, "Hey, I'm missing my period," and or it's super heavy, and they have all these symptoms that they don't know that it's perimenopause. And these are women they're seem very educated about health and whatnot, but I think a lot of women, the change that can happen 10 years before menopause kind of takes them by surprise. So tell us a little bit about that's what we're going to talk about, but tell us about your work and kind of how you got into focusing on this.
For sure. So I spent, the better part of my first career, I'd say, as a fitness and nutrition coach, as a trainer online. And I loved it. I got to work with thousands of women. And I really felt like I had this fitness and nutrition piece kind of figured out for myself. And around the age of 35, I started noticing a shift in my clients. Like they weren't getting the same results. They were starting to have some discomfort in their cycle. Their motivation was changing, things like that. And that kind of started me thinking, okay, what's this about? And then around 37, it really slammed. It hit me hard. I started having symptoms like brain fog, a lot of fatigue, a lot of energy issues, anxiety for the first time in my life. And what I like to call undeserved weight gain, where you've changed nothing and things start changing.
It's always undeserved.
Undeserved. That's true. It is always unwarranted. Maybe that's a better thing. Unwarranted. I didn't do anything, but this should happen. That's a good way. I'm going to change my language on that. Thank you. That was really good. And then my period started changing. It was getting really heavy. And that should have sent me to my healthcare practitioner at first, because anytime we have major changes, we really should be looking at that. But it wasn't until my sleep started being affected, where I was waking up every night and I just wasn't sleeping the same. I was having a lot of night sweats, where I was like, okay, something's not right. And I went off to my healthcare practitioner and had all the blood work, asked all the questions, and she was wonderful. But she kind of looked at me, Wendy, and was like, Bria, you're the picture of health. And I was like, okay. And, there's these moments you have where you're like, I'm really grateful that I don't have any of these awful things that came up when I was Googling night sweats. But if this is the picture of health, I was only 37. I'm like, and I thought I had these pieces sorted. Like, what are the next 40 years of my life going to be like? And that was really what spun me off into becoming a functional health practitioner, into, diving into female hormones specifically. And it was in that process where I was able to kind of, heal and support myself, where I no longer had the unwarranted weight gain, where I was sleeping again through the night, where my period got re-regulated, and where I started to really understand this transition and what was going on. And I really felt at that moment, like, I'm in the wellness industry and I didn't know these things. How on earth are all these amazing women out there doing these amazing things that aren't in the wellness industry? How are they going to know? And that was what kind of really propelled me into this passion, I think, of trying to simplify and educate in an area that we're so highly uneducated on.
Yeah. And just to be clear, what exactly is perimenopause? And so what does that look like? When does it start and whatnot?
I love this. So we all hear about menopause, right? I remember hearing about it on the TV. And, just to clarify, ultimately menopause is just one day, 365 days after you finish having a period. Everything leading up to that, starting around the age of 35, is called perimenopause. And it's really a reverse puberty transition. So it's not a diagnosable condition, which is why we can go and get blood tests from a doctor who diagnoses things and be like, there's nothing to diagnose, because it's not diagnosable. It's this transition. And I think a few key things that are really important for women to understand that I didn't know is that, one, all transitions require more energy, right? We can see this in life. If you move, you change careers, you get married, you get divorced, you have children, transitions, you're going to be more tired, more stuff's going to happen. So we know that more is going on in the body. In the same way, if for anyone listening, if they have ever been pregnant, like when your body's building a human, you're more tired. So we know this starts to happen. But I think that the biggest things that I didn't understand about perimenopause that I think is really important for women to know is that there's a few key things happening inside beyond the transition. One, the transition really is whose job is managing the main sex hormones. And it was your ovaries, and that now it is transitioning to be your adrenals. Your adrenals, which are our stress managers, are taking on this job. And let's be honest, our adrenals are already very taxed.
They're toast by the time you're like 37. They're done. They're cooked. Like they're like little raisins.
Totally. I already feel it. They're already like, I'm juggling 5 balls. If you're going to throw one in, one's going to get dropped. And that's what we start to have when we start to notice symptoms. The other piece, I think, is that obviously we know in this transition, the amount of our hormones are decreasing because we're going from being driven to reproduce to no longer being reproductively capable. But the balance of them is really where the symptoms, I think, get out of hand. Obviously, we're going to notice some changes with the amounts, but it's when that balance and the function of them go off where we really start to notice trouble. And we have a lot of control over that with our own life and choices. And finally, what I think is so important is understanding what's happening in our brain. And the shifting of these hormones, this transition, really impacts like the hippocampus, the amygdala, the real memory encoders and retrievers in our brain. And the science for me, when I think about it, is that we start to become really much more aware of things that are bothering us or things, past traumas that we didn't resolve. And the philosophy around it, I think, is like from puberty until now, we've been somewhat hormonally hijacked every month by estrogen, right? It kind of comes in like these rose-colored glasses, purely to make sure that we reproduce, that we're amenable to reproduce, and that we prioritize our children's lives over ours so that they survive, right? So there's a real purpose. Well, that's going away. And I think we often feel like we're not ourselves. But ultimately, what we start to notice around this time are we now have the space to kind of access our real feelings. The things that are bugging us are actually bugging us. They probably always bugged us. Now they're just really bugging us all month long and not just half the month. So knowing that, I think, gives us a little bit more selves and creating more function in our hormones so that we aren't so frustrated, so exhausted, and suffering.
Yeah, I felt the same way at 37. I was like, what the F is going on? I just looked in the mirror and I'm like, who is this person? Yeah. I was just getting angry. And it was partly my diet. I was vegan at the time, like for 6 months. I had a moment there, an experiment that did not work out. And and so now I'm more definitely erring on paleo. But, I had, poor sleep and all these things, but I just had a baby. So just like compound, like I was like adding layer after layer after layer of disasters to my health. But it was partly beginning the perimenopause as well. So for anyone listening that really wants to detox their body, go to heavymetalsquiz.com. I created a quiz for you. It only takes a couple of seconds. Based on some lifestyle questions, you can get your toxicity score and get a free video series that answers all of your frequently asked questions about how to detox your body. Check it out, heavymetalsquiz.com.
A good point. These days women are having children later and later in life. So, it's not uncommon for women to have children between the ages of 35 to 42 to 45 even. And so we don't really, if you have children in your 20s, then it sounds like you have a bit more time for your hormones to reestablish before they go through that transition. But if they're already transitioning after having a baby and then they're transitioning again, it can hit you even harder.
That was me. Because for sure, you have this huge rush of estrogen when you're pregnant. You release more estrogen than you ever produce in your entire life, the rest of your life. When you're pregnant, it feels that you feel amazing. I felt so good when I was pregnant. And then that party was over and the hair falls out. And my eyelashes fell out. My arm hair fell out. I was like, what is going on? It was crazy, and it's still on. Yeah. And, but it definitely, I was like, what? So there's something seriously wrong with me. And that's what drove me to the doctor. And that's why we're standing here today. Essentially is that health crisis I had, after having a year after having a child. But part of that was that transitory period, the adrenals burned out, whatnot, and then, the hormones being really low. And so what I really wanted to talk about is the importance of hormonal testing and kind of seeing where you're at. And if you need replacement, because definitely doing bioidentical progesterone replacement, especially starting to think about that after 35, I think is so important and can mitigate a lot of symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. I think for me in my practice, I'm a big believer in test, don't guess, because I think when it comes to taking hormones, which I do believe in, and I don't think people should suffer, we do have to recognize that it's not just about hormone production, right? We can't just take the hormones and assume everything's going to get better. There's hormone metabolization and there's hormone absorption in the body. And if we don't test and for me, it's always in a functional way, then we aren't recognizing, we might just do a blood test and check our levels, but we're not looking at the relationship or the balance necessarily of those hormones. We're not looking at, the liver function and is it able to metabolize? And we're not looking at the cellular function and oxidative stress and, gut health and all these things to know that it's being absorbed. So then we can almost, I often run into women who are taking HRT and it's either not making any difference or just making a little difference, which again, I don't believe we should suffer. But when we get into testing, we can actually see where the loss of function is and address that so that the body can kind of get back to doing what we want it to do, which is function properly.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think there's a lot of people, women, their livers are not functioning optimally. 100 million people have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and obviously livers are not functioning optimally in that state, not to mention toxins and whatnot. But, all the endocrine disruptors throw a big wrench into your hormones as well. There's many factors to consider, but I agree. I think a lot of hormone doctors you've gone to or heard about or people have gone to, I've gone to, just test the blood markers. They just look at your blood levels of hormones, which is, very myopic, just gives you one angle.
It does. It's, I heard someone explain it as your blood is really your body on its best day. We're really only getting the highlight reel. We're not getting, if you imagine going to watch a musical or a movie, and then after you watch the movie, seem to think exactly how to produce a movie. That's very different, right? We don't know how, all the costume changes, all the everything that goes on behind the scene to make that movie possible. And so blood kind of measures that front bit. And it also, as you said, it's myopic. So we're only looking at it in a way of is it low? Is it regular? Or is it high for all the people of all the sizes of all the energy demands of all the world? And it doesn't give us a very good answer, does it?
Yes. And so do you like Dutch urine testing, or what kind of functional testing do you like?
Yeah. So Dutch urine for sure, or a stress hormone panel, kind of depending on where we're at. I really love, which is a saliva for stress hormone. I really love to run, we call a metabolic wellness panel. So it's like a dried urine that's going to determine detoxification of the liver, digestion. So if we're not digesting some of our macronutrients, we're going to see some of that there, and oxidative stress levels. I love to run a mucosal barrier assessment so we can really see, like, is there leaky gut? Are we absorbing nutrients? Is there a pro-inflammation in the body? And if so, why? And then I really like to run a GI pathogen test which is a stool test to understand, like, not just, the good and bad bacteria and how they're relating to each other, but, is there a pathogen, a parasite, a bacteria? I mean, I didn't realize I had H. pylori, which is the bacteria in the stomach lining that 50% of the population has. And it was a big part of the added stress on my body that I didn't know about. So I really like to kind of look at all of them, and even a food sensitivity test at times, just to really see what's ticking everything off, because they're all connected, as you know.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to run stress tests. That's so smart, because if you're stressed out, you're making stress hormones, you're doing that at the expense of your sex hormones. So if you're stressed out,
nobody knows that as well, right?
Yeah, it's very elementary. It really is, if you think about it. But yeah, a lot of people don't know, and they're like, oh, I don't have a libido, because all you're doing is making stress hormones. So you have to bring down your stress level, which is definitely easier said than done. But the easiest way is to say no.
Yeah.
No to this and that and the kids and the husband or whatever. You have to learn to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought this up already, but I think it's so important, because we very quickly fall into, I don't feel well, like, how's my eating and how's my movement? And although those are very important and powerful ways to impact, there's 100 ways our body is being stressed out, and there's hidden ways and there's obvious ways. And that stress is really the crux of all the other dysfunction in the body, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And so let's talk about some sort of like symptoms that women would have if they're starting, getting into that perimenopause territory. Because, everyone's a little bit different when they hit menopause, when they start perimenopause. But what can that look like?
So I think some of the most common ones we see are obviously lower energy or depleted energy, brain fog, heavier periods. I've even had clients call them murder scene periods, with lots of clots and things like that in there.
Yeah. I've had a girlfriend call me. It's like, Wendy, she had to stand in the shower. She thought she was bleeding to death and she needed to go to the hospital or something. And it was like, well, it's probably perimenopause and you're okay. Just stay in the shower. But she couldn't function. Yeah, it's scary. Like I didn't have that. I did not have that, but I would be kind of scared if I had the murder scene type of period.
Yeah. And although it's common, it's not normal. It is, an indicator that there's like a major hormone imbalance in this transition. I always say, perimenopause kind of highlights what's not working for us, because it's that constant energy drawdown. So you're going to become really aware of the things that aren't working in your body and in your life. So yeah, some of the other common symptoms, of course, are, this unwarranted weight gain or stuck weight. If we are doing things and it's not working, then we know there's going to be some loss of function in there or something going on.
And I have a comment about that too, because I feel like when women are not making as much estrogen, the body will start putting on extra pounds, because that fat will make estrogen as well. And that's part of why women gain 10, 15 pounds in that transition into menopause, because the fat actively makes estrogen. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it is logical that way. But I think we often think oh, I'm, getting older, I'm just going to gain weight. And although the reality is, yes, our metabolism starts to slow, we can really fight that in different ways by putting on lean muscle, which is going to be good for us long term. And just making sure we're doing what we can to keep the hormones balanced, so we're not in a situation where our estrogen is too low, that we're steadying the process and kind of slow and steady. Sleep is a really big one. We hear disrupted night sweats, hot flashes, and anxiety, I think, and moodiness. A lot of those things come up, and less popular is, frequent urination, some, more bladder or even incontinence in any way can be signs of this phase. And I really am often careful to say, we don't want to blame the hormones. I really think it's because the transition is happening and there's more of an energy suck on the body, things are breaking down faster than they're building. So it's not necessarily our hormones, some of these things, but it is the transition that's creating them to be more present and irritating.
Yes. And so what about testosterone? So there's a lot of focus gets placed on estrogen and progesterone. What about what is the role of testosterone, and thinking about maybe testosterone replacement? For me, it was a big thing for me, because I felt like I just couldn't gain muscle. I'd be going to the gym, I'm dedicated, I'm like what is up with these flabby chicken wings? Like, what in the hell is going on here? I'm just like, I'm so over it. I'm like, I think I don't have any testosterone. And I tested, I had 2. My testosterone was 2 out, and it's supposed to be for women like 120 plus. So it's not surprising. And men are like, it's supposed to be 900. So I'm like, I'm at 2. I'm like, oh, that explains a lot. And I took testosterone and wow, it's so much better. I want to give thanks to one of our sponsors, Ionize Me Max Ionic Foot Baths. So these are the foot baths that I personally use and recommend to all of my patients. And if you're looking for an effective way to detox the body that's easy, that you can do at home, doesn't take any time out of your day, and you pull all of these toxins in your body into the water, you want to be doing a foot bath. So these are fantastic to flood ions into your body through the feet and neutralize toxins. And they can help with pain, with fatigue, with brain fog, with weight loss, even with swelling. They're great at reducing swelling, getting the lymphatics flowing, and giving you liver support by pulling out toxins through the feet and into the water. And they dramatically increase mobilization and flow of toxins into your urine and stool for 2 to 3 days after you do the foot bath. So they're not just coming out in the water. Get yours today at healthandmed.com.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love hearing you share that, because we don't realize as women that testosterone is actually our most abundant hormone in our body. So more than estrogen, more than progesterone. It is still only a tenth of what men have, but that full tenth is really important to us for our energy, for our libido, for our motivation, for our confidence, for our muscle building, like you were saying. And so it's critical for all of these things. And it is tied into that stress piece that we're talking about. You know, if stress is up, then DHEA is down, and that's that parent hormone to these sex hormones. So we're not getting the production that we need. So if you're going to fall into that place, and I think the trouble that we've seen is that it wasn't even thought of as a female hormone for so long. So it wasn't even measured for a really long time. And so women are suffering in all of these areas, and a lot of it had to do with the testosterone. So it is an important hormone to test and see where you're at, and, you know, use some bioidenticals if we need it.
Yeah, because I just refuse to turn into a butterball. Like, I'm just not doing that. Like, I'm not playing that game. And, you know, when I was younger, in my 30s, I was like, oh, I'm not going to do that hormone replacement. You know, I'm just going to age naturally. And like, hell no. When you get here and you're a mess, and your body's a mess, and you're going to the gym every day, and nothing's happening, you might reconsider.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just a tool that helps support your body. And, you know, why not? Why, you know, like, we use tools every day in our life to be better. So if you're, you know, no point in suffering, I guess is my point.
You're testing your thyroid, and you're testing this and that when you go to the doctor, and vitamin D, you know, and all this stuff. Why not test your hormones? I wish I'd started testing my hormones a lot earlier. I did like a random Dutch test when I was like, you know, maybe at 40. But I wish I'd done regular hormone testing throughout my perimenopause years, because I definitely needed testosterone and progesterone. And I think I suffered needlessly, not like, you know, suffered, but I could have been feeling a lot better, feeling my best if I had been testing those hormones.
I totally agree with you. I wish, you know, I think our world and our, you know, our culture has set up that we really don't go and do anything until we have symptoms. It would be ideal if you're right, if we did these tests, you know, if we started testing at, you know, 30 or, you know, even younger. So we knew where our levels are every year, every couple of years, to know what our foundational, like, how much of each hormone do I have when I'm feeling really great? So that would make it a lot easier to get back there, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's true. A lot of women take hormones, they take hormone replacement, and they don't really feel they don't feel all that great. Maybe as a result, they're not feeling this, you know, aha moment from taking the hormones. But, you know, you might not, the doctor might not be checking it. You may not be taking bioidentical. I've gone to different doctors that do different things. I was doing pellets, and now I'm doing bioidentical estrogen, like a capsule, and it's so much better than the pellets. So much better. So there's patches, and there's testosterone pellets, but then there's like injections. So there's different methods, and different things work for different people. You know, I decided to go to not like an OBGYN, but like a hormone specialist. Like, all they do is hormone replacement. And it's a totally different ballgame. So I think you have to look at that. And then if the hormones aren't making you feel better, then you know that you probably needed them, but there's just something else going on in your system that is more pressing that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a functional practitioner, I only work with bioidenticals, but I agree with exactly what you said there. I think like if we're taking things and it's not working, or it's not working, still aren't feeling well, then we know there's that loss of function, and we know we want to look at the whole body as a whole.
Yes. And so are there any other things women can do to, optimize their perimenopause years?
Absolutely. I always think, we have really gotten away from our foundations of health, right? And, I was guilty of this too, where it's like, I'm going to do these workouts, I'm going to try this way of eating. And, when we look at our health in general, in order for the body to do what it can do most of the time all on its own, which is heal and thrive and move through these transitions, we have kind of 4 foundational pillars of health. And I think when we start with these, and I'll give the example in a minute, then, and we do them long enough, which I think is another piece we run into, is thinking that we should be getting results yesterday or in 2 weeks. Like, we're in our 40s. We didn't get here overnight, so it is going to take a bit longer. When we do them long enough and they're not moving the needle, we know it's something else. But we have to have these foundations. And I like to look at it like a dining table. If you go out to dinner with friends or your date night or whatever it is, and that table has 4 legs. We've got sleep, which is really important, right? And really, we need really consistent sleep because the body needs to know when it's getting its energy. We've got nutrition. So we've got to figure out our nutrition. We've got to eat consistently, none of this skipping meals, and eat enough. That's really important. We've got functional movement. I always say before fitness. So if we don't have time to be walking 7,000 to 10,000 steps a day, we probably shouldn't be spending an hour in the gym. We got to get the functional movement in first. And then we have stress, pleasure, which I tie together, because if you are stressed, you can't have pleasure. But pleasure is a huge energy driver in the body. And if you're at this meal and one of these legs is rickety, it's going to be a little irritating, but you'll move on. But if 2 are rickety, you're going to be frustrated, complaining, Jimmy rigging some cardboard underneath that table. If 3 are rickety, your meal's on the floor and it's a bad experience. And that's the same with our health. So we really need to kind of start with these foundational pillars and be patient with it, because I think when we're having a lot of symptoms in perimenopause, for me, that's like you're in health debt. And we can't expect to have a down payment for a home on a great investment in our health if we're in debt. We got to get out of the debt, and that can take 6, 12, 16 weeks of consistency before we get out of that health debt. But if you are being consistent and nothing's changing, or your symptoms are so bad that you can't be consistent, that's another really good flag that it's time to get help.
Yeah, and it takes time to heal, for sure. It takes time to, definitely with the hormones, it can be really frustrating. There's so many things that interfere in our hormones. Oh my God. And so let's talk about diet, because I think that, a lot of people, I think vegetarian and veganism is on the rise, because I think there's a lot of programming in the mainstream media that this is a great idea and it sounds really good and whatnot, but I think it's very detrimental to our hormones. What is required to produce hormones?
Okay, so to produce hormones, we need vitamins and minerals. We need amino acids, and a whole host of other things. But really, I think about, when we talk about nutrition. So when we need amino acids and vitamins, we need all the foods, right, to create that piece, and then proper absorption, of course, of those foods. But I'm with you on that. I think everyone is different, and we can't just find one blanket way of eating. We see cultures in the world that primarily eat, meat and thrive. And we see cultures in the world that are vegetarian and thrive, but we're all different. And we really need to understand our unique fuel mixture. And that's difficult to do if we're just trying someone else's program. So I think when it comes to our nutrition, we want to start with okay, first we got to have consistent nutrition. So we have consistent blood sugar. So, and then we need to really look at that fuel mixture, right? If you are, in my practice, we talk about metabolic typing, which is really the rate at which your cell turns food into energy in your body. And if you have a fast metabolic type, then being a vegan or vegetarian is really not ideal for you. It's going to make you feel sick. It's going to add a great stress to your body. On the other side, if you're a slower person, and you try to eat keto, you're going to run into some issues as well. So we really want to know our fuel mixture. And what that is for us, what amount of proteins, what amount of carbohydrates, and what amount of fats that we need.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like you're going to have a tough time doing keto if your liver isn't processing and metabolizing fats very well, which is a lot of women in their menopause and perimenopause. And for sure, like you need cholesterol to make your hormones. So you have to eat, you need to eat some cholesterol. So vegan, you're not getting that. Yeah, your liver makes cholesterol, but you need more from your diet. And so you're going to have trouble with your hormones, for sure. That's a person to go. Your thyroid goes, your hormone goes, your teeth go, your joints go, and things like that, being vegan. But also, what about intermittent fasting? Because I know in my experience with intermittent fasting is that I found myself, skipping breakfast because I'm not really hungry for it. But that's a sign of cortisol dysregulation when you're not hungry in the morning. And I read that. I was like, oh my God, that's why I'm not hungry. It's not because I had a big meal the night before. If you're not hungry at all in the morning, it's your cortisol dysregulated, and then I wouldn't eat. And then my cortisol surges, mid-afternoon. I feel stressed, my blood sugar plummets, et cetera, et cetera. And I just found I needed to eat some protein in the morning, something. And that really has helped a lot, just to force myself to eat, even though I'm not hungry.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I think what people don't always recognize that when cortisol's up, insulin's up. So this is why we're seeing more weight gain during that time as well. So that consistency of eating. So my thoughts on intermittent fasting are, I don't actually think there's a ton of research around women in this age box for it. I think that there is value in the rest and digest period, right? Like taking time in between. But if the first way to protect your hormones is having regulated cortisol and a regulated circadian rhythm, like you're saying. And that looks like eating within 2 hours of waking, and then eating 4 to 5 hours later, eating 4 to 5 hours later, and eating enough of your fuel mixture, so enough protein and enough fats to feel full and satisfied in between. And when you eat like that, and sometimes we need a snack depending on how active you are, or, life getting in the way, and it's going to be more than 4 to 5 hours. But when you eat that way, Wendy, it's like you wake up at 6, you eat at 8, you eat at 12 or 1, you eat at 5 or 6, then you're getting a 14-hour fast still at night. So you're still getting the benefits of a fast if that works for you. But it's in an appropriate time of the day, right? Like in the morning, like we expend most of our energy like in the first 75% of the day. So we want to fuel that so that we don't dysregulate our hormones, dysregulate our circadian rhythm, which is going to throw off our sex hormones.
I want to give thanks to one of our sponsors. It's gluteryl transdermal glutathione spray. So glutathione is essential for detoxification and to promote energy, cleansing, and overall well-being. So enter gluteryl. It's the groundbreaking topical glutathione spray that's about to become your new wellness essential. So gluteryl delivers glutathione on demand through a multi-patented sub-nano technology, challenging the IV and the liposomal delivery systems currently on the market. So glutathione is key to balancing oxidative stress and free radicals and promoting longevity. So add gluteryl to your longevity routine this year by visiting aurowellness.com. That's AURO wellness.com, and use code Wendy5 to get 5% off your first order. I think what you were seeing where, you have to have some credit in the bank, or you can't have a debit of, of your health. And I think for me, I was coming up with a heavy docuseries, producing that. It was amazing, but it was very, very, very stressful. And I just trying to do intermittent fasting wasn't working for me anymore. It was causing me more stress because I just wasn't in a place where I could be doing that. So that, our health status changes, our stress levels change. So I think you have to factor those things in if doing that 6-hour window or 8-hour window is really appropriate for you where you are in your life. It's intermittent fasting. It's a form of a stressor, that can have a hormetic effect. It's helpful. But for me, I think it started becoming counterproductive, and I stopped doing it for right now.
I think what I hear in you saying as well is like, it's just so important that we know our own bodies, that we listen to what our body is saying to us, and that we trust it, because that's, we are all bio individuals. So at the end of the day, the more you know about your body, how she's feeling, because it changes, is going to give you so much more power and insight into how to keep her strong, how to keep her healthy, how to keep her hormonally sound.
Yes. And anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to address in regards to perimenopause or periods or anything like that?
Yeah.
Because you are the period whisperer.
Yeah, I really like to use the menstrual cycle to know, to pay attention to, what hormonal imbalance are we looking at? In between testing, we can kind of see that. I like to use it to know, if our goal, depending on our goal, right? Like if our goal is weight loss or muscle building, I like to use it to know, when is the optimal time to be pushing and, doing harder workouts, and when should we be scaling back? When should we eat more? When should we eat less? So for me, I really believe in this cyclical living when you have a cycle, but even when you don't have a cycle, we're still like cyclical beings, and we feel different at different weeks and different days and different times. So for me, I like to use it as a reminder of listening to our body and paying attention, and also just honoring what's coming up. And so that's what I think is one of the most important things that we do in this time is pay attention and listen. It's not really a time to be pushing through as much as it is a time to reflect so that we can be the CEO of our body, which is a very strategic position. I want to be thinking ahead. Where am I going? Because what you do right now is building your body 1 decade from now. And I know, so I'm in my 40s. I know in my 50s, I want to feel great. I got stuff to do and dreams to fill. And I know most of the women listening do too.
I know it's so important to be very intentional and plan ahead. Because, when I saw how my father passed away and the doctor visits and on 10 medications, I was like, oh, hell no, that's just not going to be me. That's not going to be me. And I'm going to put in that work now, because he was working real hard on taking all those medications, going to the doctor's appointment, do all this stuff. And he was working very hard on that. I'd rather put in that work now and prevent having various diagnoses and health issues that destroy your quality of life. And I think there's a lot of people out there, they see their family doing the same thing and just on that revolving door at the doctors. And it's just a sad way to live, in my opinion.
I agree with you. We really want to be proactive and get ahead of it. And I think perimenopause is the perfect time, because it is the universe, I think, kind of giving you a nudge to be like, hey, now, in a decade, you're not going to have cycles. You're going to actually have more opportunity, more space, but we're getting older. So let's deal with this now so that you can thrive for the next as many decades as you have left.
I think hitting late 30s, your body's not as resilient as it used to be. So you can't abuse your body as much as you were able to in the past. And so kind of like the rooster's coming home to roost,
Yeah.
And you're like, I have to make some changes here. I can't just drink wine and do all this stuff, eat fast food and all this stuff I used to do.
Not get a hard workout and get to work for the day,
Yeah, just work off that ice cream. So, but whatever you're feeling good. So there's a lot of listeners that they're feeling good. They're just trying to optimize. Should they be changing anything during these years and perimenopause years?
I mean, it's a great question. I think, again, in an ideal world, if I get to, it's much more easy for me and accessible to me being a practitioner. I'm going to test myself and my hormones and the function of my body once or twice a year. So if you really are a high achieving woman and you want to make sure you stay there and optimize, I would do it anyway. I would be getting tested. I would know your levels. I'd make sure you're supporting, because we don't always feel the beginning of loss of function. Usually until there's a bit of a domino effect windfall, until we start to feel crummy, especially high achieving women, because we're very good at telling ourselves everything's fine and pushing through. So we don't always realize when other things. So I think for, in an ideal world, for those listening who are feeling great, I would get on it. Like, why not be preventative, like you were talking about, so that you never have to get to the suffering part. But I think, I do think that a lot of our symptoms stem from, the state of our adrenals, like we said. So if you're feeling pretty great and genuinely are, then you're probably doing a lot of things right. And if you aren't sure, then just come back to those health pillars. Like, do I have these locked in? If these are locked in and I'm feeling good, then I can stress my body out doing other things. I can go after big dreams and goals. I can, take on an intense workout program because I want to work on the composition of my body. I can play around with different tools. But if you're not there, that's when we know we're in that debt and we want to start building.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you don't really know what's going on inside your body unless you test. And I think I've been really low in testosterone my whole life, and I wish I had tested at some point, to really figure out, what was going on, and to supplement, because it's not really like that big of a deal. Or you can take lots of magnesium. Just doing that can help to raise testosterone. There's some fairly simple things you can do to raise it naturally, short of, supplementing with it. But yeah, I think it took me a really long time, even being super knowledgeable, for it to dawn on me. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not gaining muscle because I don't have testosterone. It took me so long, years, before it finally dawned on me that might be the issue. So, because you don't know what's going on inside. So it's great to test. I think that's such a good point.
I totally agree. I think it's just this change of our mindset in the world. Instead of only going to get help when we are sick, why don't we go and be proactive about it and get ahead of it, so we're never hitting to the sick point if we can help it.
So why don't you tell the listeners where they can find you, or they can learn more about you, work with you? You have a podcast too, correct?
Oh, yeah. So my podcast is called the Period Whisperer Podcast, and all we do is talk about this time in our life in perimenopause and hormones. So you can come check that out anywhere you get your podcast and hang out. I also love to hang out on Instagram, where I share a lot of quick tips, small things to, for people who want to start to get to know that area. Or you can always find me at briatheperiodwhisperer.com.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot to talk about in this, just the hormones of this time of life.
I think people like, don't you run out of things to say? I'm like, I have over 200 episodes now. No.
There's a lot to know. There's a lot to this whole period. But yeah. So thank you so much for coming on, Bria. And what is your website again?
It's briatheperiodwhisperer.com.
Fantastic. Well, Bria, thanks for coming on the show. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in every week. I'm Dr. Wendy Myers, and you can check out my work at myersdetox.com. You can take my heavy metals quiz at heavymetalsquiz.com to determine your levels of toxins. And I'm just so grateful every week for you guys tuning in. We're honing in on 6 million downloads, and been doing this 11 years. This will be 11th year. It's just really been a joy, and many, many more, conversations to come. I have amazing guests booked out really till the rest of the year. I have some amazing content coming for you guys, focused on anti-aging, bioenergetics, and heavy metal detox, and super really fascinating conversations. So I'll see you guys for the next conversation next week.
The Myers Detox Podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.